Good evening, friend. I am Silas Whitmore, and tonight, as the world outside your window grows quiet, I invite you to settle in for a slow journey into the darker corners of the Middle Ages. Picture this: the year is long past the air, heavy with wood smoke and the soft toll of a distant church bell, marking the fall of another sun. In a village of mud-walled homes and thatched roofs, men and women huddle by dim fires, their lives ruled not by choice, but by the strange and often cruel hand of feudal law. It was a time when survival alone was hard enough, yet one misstep, a word too bold, a tree cut from the wrong forest, a rabbit snared in the Lord's field, could cost not only your freedom, but your life. Tonight, we wander softly through those laws, those baffling rules that could bring an ordinary peasant to the gallows. There is no rush here. The night is long, and the past, though grim, is best told slowly, like a fading echo across a winter field. So lean back. Let the quiet hum of the evening hold you. If you find this story to your liking, leave a simple one in the comments. And if you do not, well, show mercy and tap the like button anyway. Tonight, there are no shouts, no clamor, just the low murmur of history guiding us through shadows most have long forgotten. Now let us begin. In the dim, colorless hush of a medieval morning, the land lies heavy with mist. The fields bare and brittle stretch outward like a forgotten quilt, each furrow lined with frost that bites at the breath. Somewhere a crow calls its sound hollow against the still air. In a hut of mud and timber, a man stirs upon a bed of straw, his joints aching from cold, his stomach knotted in hunger. His children still sleep wrapped in thin blankets, their faces pale from nights of meager meals. The fire has long died. There is no bread left, no broth, only silence, and the soft rattle of wind creeping beneath the door. Beyond the hedgerows, beyond the faint outline of the church spire, the Lord's forest waits. Its branches twist upward like dark fingers, and beneath them life stirs. Deer boar, and the smallest of creatures, a rabbit plump enough to fill a pot, enough to take with a snare. To the man that rabbit is salvation, but to the law it is treason. For the forests do not belong to him, nor to any soul who tills the earth. They are the guarded sanctuaries of lords and kings, places where the creatures are counted not as game, but as treasures. To kill one, to take even a humble hair, is to steal not from nature, but from power itself. And for such theft, the punishment is rarely kind. A first offense may earn the stocks, days bound in wood feet, blistered by frost, while neighbors watch with pity or disdain. But for those who return, or those bold enough to snare larger beasts, the price grows darker. Hanging is common, the rope swaying softly in the winter air. Elsewhere, mutilation, an ear cut away, a hand severed marks the living, as warnings, reminders carved into flesh that desperation holds no sway against the Lord's decree. When the day comes for judgment, the village gathers in silence. Mothers clutch their children. The condemned stands barefoot, thin as shadow, his breath visible in the frigid dawn. There are no grand speeches, no kingly mercies, only the creak of rope, the sigh of wind, and the lesson that carries home with every bowed head: the forest is not for the hungry. Its creatures, no matter how empty the pot at home, belong to powers far beyond the reach of those who toil. And for those who dare to forget the noose, waits patiently as cold and certain as the winter wind through the trees. Listen closely now. The wind drifts through the forest, soft as a whisper. The branches sway their dark shapes, bending against the pale sky. Beneath them, a peasant kneels with an axe, its blade dull, his breath a faint cloud in the cold. His fingers ache. His cloak smells of smoke and damp wool. And before him stands a tree. It is not a grand oak, not the kind that shelters kings beneath its shadow. Just a crooked beech, its bark streaked with moss, its roots drinking from the frozen earth. To the man, it is warmth and perhaps survival. A few logs for the hearth, a way to keep his children from shivering through the night. But to the law, it is a death sentence waiting. In those days, the forests were not only filled with creatures beyond reach. The trees themselves were property. The great swaths of woodland were claimed by lords, by abbots, by kings whose feet might never touch the frozen ground where those trees grew. Each trunk, each limb, each fallen branch marked by custom and decree as belonging to powers far removed from hunger or cold. For a peasant to cut wood without permission, whether a mighty oak or a fallen bough, was to trespass against those powers, and the punishment, though it varied, was never gentle. Some were fined beyond reason debts they could never hope to pay. Others were dragged before the village, their tools burned, their homes seized. And in the most fearful places where law wore the heaviest chains, execution was no stranger. A man could swing from the gallows for cutting the wrong tree. The village knew this well. Children were warned never to wander near the Lord's groves. Fathers taught their sons to gather only twigs blown free by storms. Better to freeze, they whispered, than to face the rope. And so the forest stood silent and untouched, its wealth, guarded not by soldiers alone, but by fear. At night, families huddled close to fading coals, the wind creeping through cracks in their walls. They dreamt of warmth of fire that did not die even as the woods outside swayed with plenty. But none dared to reach for it, because the cost was not only coin, nor the stocks, nor a whipping at dawn. It was life itself, and for many the cold was easier to endure than the noose swaying softly beneath the Lord's trees. The night is still. A pale moon hangs over the village, silvering the rooftops, casting long shadows across the frozen paths. Inside a low timbered hut, a man sits near the hearth, his hands resting on his knees. His gaze lingers on the corner of the room, where beneath a folded cloak lies a bow. It is not a soldier's weapon, not a thing of war bound for battlefields or sieges. It is a simple hunting bow, the wood curved smooth by hand, the string frayed from age, a tool meant to bring down a bird, or perhaps a rabbit, if hunger grows sharp. But to possess it is to tempt death. For in those times, a bow was not merely a tool. It was power. And power in a world built on lords and kings was not for the hands of common men. The laws were clear, so clear, they were whispered to every son as he grew tall enough to reach the rafters. A peasant found with a bow, even one without an arrow, could be branded a poacher, a thief, or worse, a traitor. To hold such a thing was to threaten the order itself, to suggest rebellion, however quietly against the will of those above. Punishment was swift, and it rarely cared for intent. A man could protest, say it was for crows stealing grain, or for wolves prowling near his hut. But the law heard no excuses. The bow was proof enough. Some were stripped of what little they owned, sent into exile, marked as outlaws. Others were brought to the square, their sentences read aloud beneath the toll of a church bell. The crime, they would say, was not the bow itself, but what it might mean. And for that meaning, some were hanged, their silhouettes swaying gently as warnings to all who might think of stringing a bow in secret. In the villages, the lesson lingered like smoke. Men learned to keep only staffs, crude clubs, tools, too heavy for suspicion. The bow light and silent became a shadow seen only in the hands of soldiers or in the grip of a lord's huntsman riding proudly through the fields. And so hunger deepened. The skies filled with birds, the fields stirred with hares, and still the peasant's hands remained empty. For in the quiet of those long winters, it was not hunger that most feared, but the noose waiting for anyone bold enough to hold a simple bow. The bell tolls. Its sound drifts softly over the fields, carried by the wind settling over the village like a heavy blanket. It is a holy day. The church doors are open, the priest's voice murmurs in the cold air, and candles flicker like trembling stars within the dark stone walls. But far from the square on the edge of the Lord's land, a man bends low over the soil. His hands are rough. His knees are sunk deep into the frozen earth. The ground must be tilled, the seeds scattered, if his family is to eat when spring comes. Yet each thrust of his spade is a whisper of defiance, and each clump of turned soil brings him closer to the noose. For in those days, work itself could be a crime. Not on every day, but on those marked by the church as sacred days of rest days set aside for prayer. The laws carved from faith and fear demanded that even the poorest lay down their tools, no matter how empty their pots, no matter how close the frost crept to their doors. To plow, to sow, even mend a roof on such a day was to risk more than a fine. It was to risk one's life. The church claimed these rules kept the soul pure. The Lords claimed they upheld order. But to the peasant, whose children whimpered from hunger, the law felt like a cruel hand pressing down, silencing his every effort to survive. If caught, a man might first be dragged before the villagers, his tools broken, his face branded with the mark of sin. Repeat offenders were treated more harshly. Some were flogged in the square, their backs marked red, while the priest read scripture over the sound of the whip. And some were marched to the gallows, their only crime the turning of earth on a day forbidden by men and God alike. So the lesson spread, quiet and deep. Villages grew still on holy days, the fields silent, the forges dark. Hunger thickened like fog, but still no one moved. Better, they whispered, to starve by the hearth than to feed the soil and meet the rope. And thus the land itself seemed to pause, its fields lying dormant, not from the weight of winter, but from the weight of fear. The fear that a single day's work done on the wrong day could cost a life as easily as any blade. The forest is quiet, the kind of quiet that settles deep, where even the wind moves softly, weaving through the branches without a sound. Somewhere among the trees, a deer stirs. Its breath hangs in the cold air, its hooves pressing into the soft earth as it grazes near the shadow of a stream. Not far away, a man moves through the undergrowth. He is no hunter, only a woodcutter searching for kindling, his hands stiff from the chill. He carries no bow, no snare, only a small hatchet meant for twigs and fallen branches. But the forest floor is slick. A step, a slip, a crack of a branch beneath his feet, and the deer startles, bolts, and in its panic strikes a tree. The sound is sharp, the fall sudden. When the man kneels beside it, the deer is still, its chest rising no more. Not by his blade, not by any design, but to the law it matters little. For in those times, the deer of the kings or the Lord's forest were more than animals. They were living emblems of power, bound by law and guarded as fiercely as treasure. To take one, by snare, by arrow, or by chance, was to trespass upon that power. And even when death came by accident, the punishment was as heavy as if it were planned. A man found near such a beast might be dragged to the manor hall, accused of poaching, his protests ignored. Some were forced to pay impossible fines, debts that chained their families for years. Others were whipped before the village, their backs laid open to the cold air. And in the harshest of lordships, where mercy was thin, there was no distinction between accident and crime. The gallows awaited just the same. The villagers learned quickly. They stepped carefully when they walked the Lord's woods, eyes down, avoiding even the rustle of deer. If one was found dead, they turned away, left it where it lay, and whispered prayers that no one would see their footprints. And so fear hung as heavy as the mist. It was not the wolves that men dreaded most, nor the cold that burned their bones, but the thought that a single misstep, a single startled creature could bring the rope to their necks. In those forests, the deer grazed freely, unafraid. It was the men, not the beasts, who lived as if hunted. The river moves slowly. Its surface glimmers faintly beneath the pale morning sky, ripples spreading like whispers across the stillness. Along its banks, reeds sway, gently brushing against the current, their tips bending with every breath of wind. A lone man stands knee-deep in the cold water, his trousers soaked his hands, gripping a simple wooden pole. He casts a line, careful and quiet. Not for sport, not for trade. Only for food, one fish, perhaps two, to bring home to his waiting family. The village stores are low. The winter has bitten deep. The river, dark and deep, feels like mercy. But to the law, it is not mercy at all. It is theft. For the waters, like the forests, do not belong to him. The streams, the lakes, even the smallest ponds were claimed long ago by lords, abbots, and kings. Every fish, every eel, every silver flash beneath the current was counted as property wealth, measured not in coins, but in scales. To dip a net, to cast a line without the blessing of one in power, was to risk far more than a reprimand. If caught, a man might be fined sums. He could never pay debts that would chain his family for years. Others, their nets burned and tools shattered, were beaten and cast out as examples. And in places where law ran colder than the river itself, the sentence was death. A rope, a beam, and a village, forced to watch as a man swayed in the breeze for the crime of catching what the river freely gave. The lesson spread like ripples. Villagers learned to stand back from the water, to wait for the Lord's men to fish first, to hope for a tossed scrap or the smallest catch left behind. Children were warned to never skip stones in the wrong stream, for fear it might draw unwanted eyes. And so the river kept flowing, silent and indifferent, its fish darting beneath the surface, untouched by the hungry hands that stood shivering on the banks. Hunger pressed against the bones of many, yet still they turned away, whispering to one another that the water was as dangerous as the gallows. For in those days even the river could betray a man, not with its cold, not with its current, but with the quiet weight of law, waiting to turn a simple fish into the price of his life. And beyond the rivers, beyond the waters that could not be touched, another danger waited, a danger not born of hunger, nor of cold, but of words. For even a whispered insult carried on the wind could lead a peasant to the gallows. The tavern is dim. The air is thick with smoke, the scent of sour ale and wet wool clinging to every beam. Voices rise and fall, murmured conversations weaving through the low crackle of the hearth. A man sits near the back shoulders, hunched, his drink cradled in his hands. His voice is low, tired, but his words are careless. He mutters about the Lord, not praise, not thanks, but a complaint, a whisper of anger at the taxes, at the hunger, at the weight of laws that press harder than the winter wind. He thinks no one hears, but someone always hears. For in those days, the tongue could betray a man faster than any weapon. A single word, a careless jest, even a sigh that hinted at disrespect could turn a quiet evening into a death sentence. To speak ill of the Lord was not merely impolite. It was treason. And treason in a world where power clung to every stone and title was a crime that hung heavier than most. If reported, the man might be dragged from his home before dawn. His neighbors would whisper, but not intervene. He would be hauled to the manor or to the square, his words read aloud as if they were daggers, each syllable an offense to the order of things. The punishment varied. Some were branded, their lips seared to mark their sin. Others were flogged before the village, their cries mingling with the priest's sermon on obedience. And some found themselves beneath the gallows, the noose swinging softly as a reminder that even thoughts, if spoken, could cost a life. The lesson grew heavy in the hearts of the people. They learned to speak only blessings of their lords, or to say nothing at all. Even in the quiet of their own huts, voices dropped low for fear that the walls themselves might carry words to listening ears. The silence became a habit, as deep as the cold, as constant as the hunger. And so villages grew quieter still, not only in reverence, not only in fear of God, but in fear of their own tongues. For a single sentence drifting into the wrong ear could tighten a rope around the neck as surely as any blade. And beyond the whispers, beyond the fearful hush, another danger loomed, not of words, nor of rivers, nor of forests, but of footsteps. For when darkness fell, and a man walked where he should not, the night itself could lead him to the gallows. The streets are silent. The lamps, few and far between, burn low, with a soft, flickering glow, casting shadows that stretch long and thin across the cobblestones. Somewhere a dog barks once, and then all is still again. Night in a medieval town is not for wandering, not for those without a reason. A man moves quietly along the edge of the road. His cloak is pulled tight, his breath fogging in the cold. He is no thief, no spy. Only a miller's son returning late from a neighboring village, his feet sore his mind on the small loaf of bread tucked at his side. But to the guards, his steps are guilt enough. For in those days, the towns were ruled not only by walls and gates, but by time. The bell, when it rang, marked more than the hour. It marked the closing of streets, the lowering of bars, the moment when every honest soul was meant to be within doors. To walk beneath the moon without written leave or a guard's escort was to invite suspicion. And suspicion was often all it took. If stopped, the man could plead, say he was no thief, no threat, only a weary traveler. But the law, cold as the stones beneath his boots, cared little for explanations. Some were fined, their coins taken before the night was done. Others were thrown into the stocks, come morning, their faces pelted with the jeers, and sometimes the filth of those who passed. And in towns where fear ran deepest, the charge of wandering without cause could turn quickly into a death sentence, the accused branded as spies or rebels, their lives ended beneath the very lamps they passed. The people learned quickly. They shut their shutters tight when the bell tolled, bolted their doors, and whispered prayers as the streets emptied. Even the most desperate chose to sleep on the dirt beyond the walls rather than risk a single step in the wrong hour. And so, as night deepened, the town became a hollow place. The wind curled through empty alleys. The lamps burned down to dying embers. And only the echo of boots, those of the watch, not the wanderer, marked the stillness of the dark. Yet beyond these quiet streets, beyond the curfews and the tolling bells, another danger waited, not for those who walked, but for those who hid. For to shelter the wrong soul, to open one's door to a hunted man, was to invite a peril far greater than the night itself. The night is colder here. The frost clings to the thatched roofs. The smoke from dying hearths curls upward, thin and gray, fading into the pale stars. In the stillness, a knock sounds. Soft, urgent, a sound not meant for neighbors to hear. Inside a hut, a family stirs. A father, weary from the day's toil, opens the door just enough to see the figure beyond. A man breathless, his clothes torn, mud clinging to his boots. His eyes dart like a cornered animal. He says no name, only one word, please. To turn him away feels cruel. The wind bites deep tonight. The fields beyond are wide empty and cold enough to still a man's heart before dawn. And yet, to let him in is to invite another kind of cold. the cold weight of law. For fugitives in those times were not merely hunted. They were cursed by decree. Any who gave them shelter, any who fed them, even offered a blanket or a cup of water could share their fate. To aid a man marked by the Lord's edict was to stand beside him in guilt, no matter the reason. No distinction was made for kindness. No mercy was granted for pity. Punishments came swift. Some were whipped, their homes stripped bare as a warning. Others, their entire families cast out, were marked as traitors. And in the harshest lordships, those who offered shelter were hanged alongside the very fugitives they tried to save, the ropes swaying in the same winter wind. So fear grew deep in the villages. Doors stayed shut, no matter the knocks that came after dark. Even those with soft hearts learned to harden them, whispering prayers for the desperate while bolting their own latches tight. For in those cold nights, a single act of mercy could pull a whole family into ruin. And so, the roads became graveyards of footprints, paths, where the hunted moved alone, leaving only traces in the snow. No hearths welcomed them, no windows opened, save for those willing to risk everything. Yet beyond this fear, beyond the risk of kindness, another danger lay waiting. Not for those who sheltered, nor those who fled, but for those who simply could not pay what was owed. For when taxes came due, and a man's hands were empty, even the poorest could find themselves facing the weight of a sentence no coin could erase. The morning fog is heavy. It clings to the rooftops, curls through the narrow lanes, and settles on the fields beyond the village. The sound of hooves breaks the stillness. Slow, deliberate. A small group of riders approaches their cloaks, marked with the crest of the Lord. The tax collectors. Doors open one by one as the riders pass. Men and women step outside, coins gathered in cloth faces pale. For most, it is not a payment. It is a surrender of what little silver grain or goods they have left. Those who can pay bow hand over their due and retreat inside with heavy hearts. But for those who cannot, there is no retreat. In those days, taxes were more than burdens. They were chains binding even the poorest to the will of their lords. A late payment, a missing coin, a field too barren to yield its share was not seen as misfortune. It was seen as defiance. And defiance, however unintentional, brought punishment that reached far beyond coin. Some debtors had their tools seized, their homes stripped bare, their families left to wander. Others were locked in wooden cages, left on display for days, their shame as visible as their suffering. And in the darkest corners of the realm, where the law bit hardest, those who failed to pay could face a far grimmer fate. Execution. Not as vengeance, but as a warning to remind every villager that duty once owed must be met, even if it meant their life. The fear was enough to drive some to desperate ends. A family might sell their last goat, their only blankets, or even indenture themselves to the Lord's service for years, all to escape the rope. For the whisper spread quickly, those who could not pay would pay in flesh or in breath. And so the riders came and went, leaving behind empty cottages, hollow fields, and a silence heavier than the fog. Villagers whispered prayers as they hid their eyes, not daring to watch as wagons carried away neighbors or worse bodies. Beyond these fears of coin and consequence, there was yet another peril that crept through the countryside. Not from taxes, nor from fugitives, nor from curfews, but from the very grain itself. For in times of hunger, when the fields yielded little, even the way a man traded or stored his harvest could lead him to the same fate as any thief or rebel. The granaries stand quiet. Their wooden beams creak softly in the night, the scent of dust and dry husks drifting through the cool air. Beyond their walls, the village sleeps, bellies half full, dreams thin and restless. In times like these, grain is more than food. It is power. It is survival, and it is guarded more fiercely than gold. A man moves through the shadows, his lantern dim, his breath slow and measured. He is not a thief in his own eyes, only a farmer taking a small portion of what he sowed, what his hands pulled from the earth. A sack of grain enough to barter enough to keep his family fed through the weeks ahead. But the laws see it differently. For in those days, grain was not simply a harvest. It was a matter of control. Lords and magistrates decreed when it could be sold, where it could be stored, and at what price it might change hands. Hoarding, selling in secret, or even hiding a handful to avoid tax was considered a grave offense. Not because it was theft, but because it disrupted the order that kept the powerful strong. If caught, a man might face heavy fines, stripping away all he hoped to save. Others were whipped, their sacks burned before the eyes of their neighbors, the smoke carrying the lesson further than any sermon. And in the harshest seasons, when famine loomed and tempers sharpened, some were hanged for such acts, executed not for stealing, but for daring to keep what they had grown. The fear settled deep into every home. Families learned to store only what was ordered to surrender their harvest at the appointed times, no matter how thin their cupboards grew. Whispers of resistance flickered and died, quickly snuffed out by the memory of neighbors who vanished or, worse, swung from the Lord's beam for a single hidden sack. So the granaries stood full, their contents counted and watched, while the people outside counted crumbs. The grain locked and guarded became as distant to them as the treasures of a king. And beyond these guarded stores, beyond the rules that bound their bellies, another shadow waited. Not of law over land or tax or harvest, but the shadow of death itself carried out before the eyes of all. For when punishment came, it was not whispered in secret halls. It was displayed with ritual and spectacle, so that every villager would remember exactly what awaited those who strayed. The morning is pale, the sky a flat, colorless gray, the air still. Even the wind seems to wait. In the center of the village square, a wooden platform stands. Fresh straw has been scattered on the planks. It rustles softly when the breeze stirs. Around it the villagers gather, quiet, drawn not by choice, but by command. The condemned stands at the edge of the platform, barefoot, head bowed. A rope sways gently beside him, its fibers rough and frayed. It creaks as it turns back and forth with the weight of the cold morning air. The priest murmurs a prayer. His voice is low, almost lost beneath the sound of the villager's breath. The executioner waits, hood-drawn hands steady on the beam. There are no shouts here, no chaos, only a stillness heavy and long. In these times, punishment was not hidden. It was not done behind closed doors. It was shown, deliberate, measured. Every movement from the reading of the crime to the final drop was made for all to see, so no one could forget. Some villagers close their eyes. Some stare at the ground, counting the cracks in the stone to avoid the sight above. Children cling to their mothers' faces, buried in worn shawls. But none leave. None can. When the end comes, it is quiet. A lever. A sound like a sigh from the wooden frame. And then only the creak of rope. The moment lingers. The fear settles deeper than the silence. The body will be taken down by dusk. But the image, it will remain. It will echo in the minds of the villagers as they walk home, as they close their doors, as they sit by their fires in uneasy quiet. It will remind them that the law is not just ink on parchment. It is here. It breathes. It watches. And as night falls, the village grows still once more. The straw is swept away. The platform stands empty, waiting. and the people they whisper to each other in voices, soft as the wind of all the ways a life might end if one strays too far beyond the lines drawn by lords and kings. The night deepens. The fires in the hearths burn low, casting soft amber light against the walls of quiet homes. The wind has settled. The village, the forests, the rivers all rest beneath the same silent sky. You have heard tonight of the rules that bound the peasants of old. Rules that turned hunger into crime. That made a rabbit a fallen branch, a whispered word heavy enough to bring a man to his end. And though centuries have passed, though the noose no longer sways in the village square, the echoes of that life remain. It is easy in the comfort of a warm room to wonder how such a world could stand, how men and women cold and worn carried their burdens beneath the weight of laws so cruel. But perhaps in the quiet there is another thought to keep, that even in such darkness people endured. They held close to their families. They whispered their prayers. And each morning they rose again, no matter how heavy the day before. There is a kind of peace in remembering that life, however harsh, has always been carried forward by small, stubborn acts of survival, by shared bread, by silent glances, by the will to see another sunrise. And as you drift into sleep, perhaps that thought can rest beside you, soft as the wind outside your window, steady as the faint glow of embers on a cold night. Thank you, dear listener, for walking with me through this quiet journey into the past. May your dreams be gentle, your rest untroubled, and your mind free of the shadows we have passed through tonight. And if this story has found you well, leave a simple one in the comments. If not, well, tap the like button anyway. Good night, my friend. This is Silas Whitmore bidding you peaceful dreams.